Before I begin, if you're listening to this story right now, I want you to tell me something in the comments. Have you ever found out something important about your own family, something you thought you would be part of, only to learn you were left out? If you've ever felt that kind of quiet heartbreak, just write yes below. I want to know I'm not alone in this feeling. Now, let me begin. When my daughter-in-law told me they got married yesterday, I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I didn't even ask why. I just stood there with a small smile on my face, the kind of smile you put on when you feel your heart fall apart, but you don't want anyone to see the pieces. She said it so calmly, like she was telling me what she bought from the grocery store. "We got married yesterday," she said, while standing at the doorway, her hand still on the handle, as if she was ready to leave before I could say anything back. And in that moment, I froze. Not because I didn't understand her words. I understood every part of that sentence, but my mind couldn't accept it. Yesterday? Married? Without me? Without even a call? Without even telling me the date? I thought she would wait for me to speak, but she didn't. She just stood there, straight-faced, almost avoiding my eyes. I don't know if she was ashamed or guilty or simply indifferent. I couldn't tell, and maybe that's what hurt the most, not knowing what she felt. I remember my hands trembling slightly, but I kept them behind my back so she wouldn't notice. I didn't want her to see how deeply I was affected. It was strange. I had imagined so many scenarios about my son's wedding day. I imagined what I'd wear, how I'd hold his hand when he got nervous, how I'd smile at her like a mother welcoming a new daughter into the family. I imagined helping them pick decorations, tasting the cake, laughing at mistakes, complaining about traditions. I imagined being part of something joyful, something meaningful. But not this. Never this. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, like she had somewhere to be. "It was small," she added, "just a quick ceremony." And she said it like it was supposed to comfort me, but it didn't. If anything, those words cut deeper. A small ceremony meant it would have been easy for them to include me. No big arrangements, no huge guest list, no chaos. Just a simple moment, a moment they didn't think I deserved to be part of. I nodded slowly, pretending to understand, even though inside I felt the floor slipping away. I told her, "Congratulations." I don't know how I said it without my voice breaking. Maybe years of practice, years of being strong, of swallowing hurt, of keeping peace, taught me to hide the cracks. Maybe motherhood teaches you how to smile through pain better than anything else in the world. She thanked me softly, but her thank you didn't feel warm. It felt like something she said out of politeness, not affection. And then she left. Just like that. She didn't come inside. She didn't sit with me. She didn't ask if I wanted to see pictures. She just turned around and walked away. I stood at the door long after she disappeared from sight. I watched the empty street, hoping she would come back and say it was a joke or a mistake or some rushed moment she wanted to explain. But she didn't come back. The silence of my home felt heavier that day. I walked back inside slowly, touching the dining table, the chair by the window, the kitchen counter, all the places I imagined celebrating with them. I had even kept a small notebook on the table, writing ideas for their wedding, things like songs for the ceremony, menu ideas, guest list suggestions. Looking at it now, it felt childish, like a dream someone forgot to wake me up from. I sat down and placed my hand over the cover of that notebook. It was warm from the sunlight, but inside I felt cold. People think heartbreak only comes from romantic relationships, but the truth is, the deepest heartbreaks often come from our own children, not because they mean to hurt us, but because they grow into lives we're no longer invited into, and we are left standing on the outside, still loving them with the same intensity as when they were small. I didn't want to blame her completely. I knew this wasn't just her decision. My son, he had a part in this too, and that realization was the hardest to accept. As I sat in that chair, I began remembering everything, the years of raising him alone, The nights I stayed up when he was sick, the birthdays where I worked double shifts just to buy him a small gift, the mornings I'd wake him up for school with a kiss on his forehead. I remembered the little boy who once held my hand and said, "Mom, I'll always choose you." But time changes everything, and somehow, without me noticing, I went from being his whole world to being a quiet corner of it. The next day, I tried calling him. I wanted to hear his voice. I wanted to ask him why. I wanted him to tell me it wasn't personal, that he still loved me, that he just made a quick decision, that it wasn't meant to shut me out. He didn't answer the first time, or the second, or the third. On the fourth try, I stopped calling. Not because I gave up, but because I knew if I heard his voice, I wouldn't be able to hide my pain. I didn't want him to feel guilty. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who demands explanations. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring. It didn't.
I kept thinking about the moment she said those words. "We got married yesterday." The tone, the calmness, the distance. It felt rehearsed. It felt like she had been preparing to say it. And that made me wonder, how long had they been planning this without me? How long had they kept the date secret? How long had they been discussing a life that didn't include me? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything. The conversations we had before, the hints I missed, the moments where she seemed distant, the times my son brushed off wedding plans when I brought them up. Maybe they had decided months ago that I wouldn't be part of it. Maybe they thought I'd make things complicated. Maybe I was an inconvenience. Maybe I was already forgotten. The next morning, I made myself a cup of tea, but I barely drank it. I just held the warm mug in my hands, trying to stop them from trembling. I sat by the window, watching people pass by, couples holding hands, families walking together, teenagers laughing on their way somewhere. The world looked normal. My world didn't. It took everything in me not to cry. I told myself, "You're strong. You'll be okay. You've survived harder things." But this pain was different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, like a small leak in your heart that you don't notice at first, but eventually it fills everything with sadness. Around noon, I got a call. Not from my son, but from a distant relative who somehow already knew. She said, "Congratulations, I heard he got married." I forced a laugh and said, yes, it was beautiful." She asked if I had pictures. I lied. I said I hadn't received them yet. After we hung up, I sat in the silence again. I didn't know what hurt more, the fact that they married without me, or the fact that they weren't even trying to include me afterward. No visit, no call, no explanation. It was like they had drawn a line, and I was on the outside of it. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself, cleaning, organizing shelves, folding clothes, wiping the kitchen counter, opening drawers I hadn't touched in years. But every corner of the house reminded me of him. Every memory felt heavier now. By evening, I finally sat down on the couch and let the tears come quietly. Not loud sobbing, just soft tears that slid down without permission. Tears that came from a place deep inside. I wasn't angry. I wasn't resentful. I was simply heartbroken. And that kind of heartbreak, the kind that comes from your own child, is something you can't prepare for. But this was only the beginning. I didn't know that the truth, the real truth, was still waiting for me. And when I finally learned it, everything changed. The next morning felt strangely quiet, even for my small home. Maybe it was just the weight inside me that made the silence feel heavier. I kept expecting my phone to buzz. I kept glancing at it every few minutes, even though I knew it hadn't moved. It was almost like a habit, the kind you form when you're waiting for someone you love to remember you. I tried to keep myself busy. I cleaned the living room twice. I cooked breakfast even though I wasn't hungry. I folded laundry that didn't need folding. But no matter what I did, my mind always drifted back to the same thought. My son was married now, and he didn't think I deserved to be there. Around noon, I looked out the window and saw the mail truck stopping at my house. I felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe they sent a card. Maybe they mailed something. Maybe this was their way of telling me they cared. It sounds silly, doesn't it? Hoping for a simple card. But when you're hurting, even the smallest gesture feels like a lifeline. I went outside quickly and opened the mailbox. Bills, ads, a medical appointment reminder, but nothing from them. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, holding the cold metal door of the mailbox. I felt foolish, overly hopeful, childish. But that's what pain does. It makes you wait for kindness, even when you're not sure it will come. Back inside, I sat on the couch and held my phone in my hands. I stared at his name in my contacts. I hovered my thumb over the call button more times than I can count. But something stopped me every time. I didn't want to force him to explain himself. I didn't want to corner him or pressure him. Love, especially a mother's love, sometimes becomes quiet even when it shouldn't. The day passed slowly. I reheated my breakfast for dinner and ate it without tasting much. I lay on my bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. My home felt cold, even though the heater was running. Grief has a way of seeping into the air around you, making everything feel heavier. Late into the night, I finally heard a vibration. My heart picked up. I reached for the phone quickly, only to realize it was a message from a store, reminding me of a sale. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. This was not the life I imagined for myself, waiting for a child who wasn't waiting for me. Sleep came slowly that night, slipping in only when my body couldn't stay awake anymore. The next morning, I decided to get out of the house. I didn't know where I wanted to go. I just knew I had to breathe something other than sadness. I put on my coat and walked down the street to a small park near my neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, just a few benches, some trees, a walking path, but I liked it. It reminded me of simpler times when my son was a boy and we used to come here to feed ducks. As I walked past the familiar trees, the memories came back like warm wind against my skin. I remember him holding my hand, laughing, asking if he could chase the birds. I remember packing sandwiches and juice boxes. I remember how he would run ahead, but always turn back to see if I was still following him. I never realized that one day he would stop looking back altogether.
I sat on one of the benches and watched people pass by, young couples with strollers, older couples walking slowly together, parents chasing toddlers. It was strange how life just kept moving forward, even when your heart wanted it to pause. A woman sat beside me after a while. She looked around my age, maybe a little younger. She had a kind smile. For a moment, we sat in silence, both of us enjoying the calm around us. Then she said, "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I nodded. "It is. You come here often?" she asked gently. "Sometimes," I said, "when I need a little peace." She nodded, as if she understood exactly what I meant. Me too. Helps clear the mind, helps the heart breathe. Her words struck me more than she knew. I smiled softly. She didn't know me. She didn't know what I was carrying. But sometimes the kindest words come from strangers who know nothing of your story. We talked for a little while. Nothing deep, just small things. Flowers, weather, how we both liked quiet mornings.
and then she left. But those few minutes of conversation felt like a small bandage on a large wound. When I returned home, the house felt quieter again, but I felt a little lighter. Not healed, not fine, just a little less heavy. The next day, I finally heard from my son. Not a call, but a message. It came early in the morning when the sun was barely rising. The screen lit up with his name, and for a moment, I didn't touch the phone. I was afraid. Afraid of what he might say, afraid of what he might not say. But I forced myself to breathe and opened it. It was short. Too short for what I needed. "Hey, Mom. Sorry I didn't call. Been busy. We'll visit sometime next week." That was it. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of the wedding. Just a simple, "we'll visit." I read it again and again, trying to find hidden meaning. Was he nervous? Was he guilty? Or was he simply distant now? I typed a reply more times than I can count. Long messages, short messages, different tones, different approaches. But I deleted them all. Finally, I sent only this. "Okay, I'll be home." I wanted to say more. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to tell him I missed him. But I didn't, because I felt like I didn't have the right anymore. The week passed slowly, each day stretching longer than the last. I cleaned the house again, washed the dishes twice, prepared the guest room, even though I wasn't sure they'd stay. I made his favorite snacks just in case. It felt like I was preparing for something fragile, a moment that could either heal me or break me even more. On the day they were supposed to visit, I woke up early. I opened all the curtains to let in the light. I brewed fresh coffee. I paced back and forth, checking the clock every few minutes. I didn't want to look too eager, but I didn't want to miss the sound of their car either. The hours passed. They didn't come in the morning. They didn't come in the afternoon. By evening, I was sitting on the couch, staring at the doorway. My coffee had turned cold a long time ago, untouched. The snacks remained on the counter, wrapped neatly. I kept glancing at my phone. Nothing. Around 7 p.m., the message finally came. "Sorry, Mom. Something came up. We'll come another day." My hands loosened around the phone. My heart sank with a heaviness I can't put into words. I didn't cry. I just sat there quietly. The kind of quiet that wraps around you like a heavy blanket you can't push away. I typed, "Okay," again, even though it hurt. I didn't want to make things harder. I didn't want to ask what came up. I didn't want to beg for explanations. I just wanted to rest. 3 days passed before I heard from them again. This time, they said they would stop by for a quick visit. Quick. That word stayed with me for hours. It sounded like something you do when you're checking off a task, not visiting someone you love. But I told myself to be grateful. At least they were coming. When the day arrived, I prepared tea and cookies. Nothing fancy. I didn't want to overwhelm them. I stood near the window, waiting for their car. When they finally pulled up, my heart began beating faster. I stood up straight. I fixed my hair. I took a deep breath and opened the door before they even knocked. My son smiled softly. It was a gentle smile, but different, like he was holding back something. She stood beside him, my daughter-in-law, her eyes moving around the house like she was inspecting it. She didn't smile back. They stepped inside, and I noticed something between them, a tension, subtle but present, like they weren't completely comfortable. But I didn't ask. I didn't want to make things worse. We sat in the living room. My son talked about work, about how busy things had been, about how everything happened so fast with the wedding. I nodded along, pretending to understand, pretending it didn't hurt. Then she said just one sentence, one that stayed with me long after they left. We didn't want a big wedding. It felt easier this way. Easier. That was the word she used. Easier to leave me out. Easier to keep me uninvolved. Easier to make decisions without me. I smiled politely. I offered more tea. I asked soft questions about their new life. But inside, something fragile was breaking slowly. They stayed for only 30 minutes. Then they stood up, saying they had errands to run. My son hugged me. A quick, polite hug, not the warm ones he used to give. She nodded goodbye. I stood at the door watching them leave again. Their car drove away, and my home fell silent all over again. But something was different this time. There was something in the way she avoided eye contact, something in the way he kept glancing at her before answering my questions, something in the way they left quickly, something they weren't telling me. And I didn't know then, but the truth was already on its way, a truth I wasn't prepared for. After they left that day, I sat on the couch for a long time without moving. The house felt heavier than before, like the walls themselves had exhaled and settled into a tired silence. I kept replaying every moment of their visit in my mind. The way she looked around without warmth, the way he kept glancing at her before speaking, the way they both seemed eager to leave. It was as though they had come because they felt obligated, not because they wanted to. I don't know how long I sat there, hands folded in my lap, staring at the empty doorway they had walked through. Maybe an hour, maybe longer. Time moves differently when your heart is trying to understand something your mind doesn't want to accept. That night, I made tea, even though it was late. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup and sat by the kitchen window. Outside, a soft drizzle had begun to fall, tapping gently against the glass. The sound was calming in a strange way. Rain has always made me reflective. It washes the world even if it doesn't wash the heart. I kept thinking about that one word she used, easier. Why easier? What made including me difficult? What had I done? I searched my memories, every conversation, every holiday, every small moment, to find something that could explain the distance between us. But I found nothing. Or maybe I found too much and none of it made sense. My son had always been the kind of boy who needed reassurance. When he was little, he would look back at me every few steps to make sure I was still there. He wasn't the bold, fearless type. He was gentle, soft-hearted, sensitive. I remember how he used to run into my arms when he had a bad day at school. I remember how he would lay his head in my lap when he was tired. I remember how we had promised each other, silently maybe, that we would always be close. But time changes people, doesn't it? Not always because they want to change, but because life nudges them into directions they never planned. Over the next few days, I tried to distract myself again. I read books, I cleaned the kitchen more times than necessary, I walked around the neighborhood. But every quiet moment pulled my mind back to that visit. And the more I thought about it, the more I felt something wasn't right. It wasn't just that they had married without telling me. It was something deeper, something hidden, a truth beneath the surface. One evening, about a week later, I received a call from my neighbor, Mrs. Hall. We weren't close friends, but she was the type of person who knew everything happening around the block. She was kind-hearted beneath her talkative nature, and even though she often shared more than necessary, her intentions were usually good. "I saw your boy and his wife last weekend," she said lightly, as if it was casual. "They were at the grocery store near Willow Lane." I smiled at the thought. "Oh, that's nice." But something in her tone made me pause. "They looked, well," she hesitated. "They looked like they were in a bit of a hurry, and she seemed tense." "Tense?" I repeated quietly. "Yes, very tense. She was talking quickly, and he looked worried. I didn't want to stare too much, but I don't know. It felt like something was wrong." I felt my chest tighten a little bit. "Did they see you?" "Oh, no. They were too caught up in their conversation." I thanked her for telling me, though I wasn't sure how to feel. It wasn't that I wanted to know everything about their lives. I just wanted to understand if something was happening that they didn't feel they could share with me. After I ended the call, I sat in the living room thinking about what she said. Tense, worried, caught up in their conversation. I didn't want to assume anything negative, but the uneasiness in my stomach wouldn't go away. A few days later, I got another message from my son. Again short, again distant. "Busy week, Mom. Hope you're doing well." I stared at the words for a long time. They felt like something you'd send to a coworker, not a mother. I replied with my usual, "I'm okay, take care." And then I waited again for something more, but nothing came. I found myself remembering a memory from years ago, the night before he moved out for college. We were sitting on the floor packing clothes into a suitcase. He looked nervous, excited, overwhelmed all at once. And he said to me, "Mom, no matter where I go, I'll never forget to call you first." At the time, I believed him completely, not because he had promised, but because it felt like the kind of truth that sits in the bones of a child who loves deeply. Funny, isn't it, how life tests even the promises made in love? One quiet afternoon, about 2 weeks after their brief visit, I went to the grocery store near my house. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just picking up milk, bread, fruit. I was at the checkout counter when I heard a familiar voice a few aisles away. A quiet part of me instantly recognized it. It was my daughter-in-law. I didn't want to appear like I was following her or spying, so I stayed where I was. But the sound of her voice carried just enough for me to hear fragments. She said, "No, I don't want him to know yet. It'll only complicate things." My heart skipped. Then another voice, her friend maybe, replied, "He deserves to know. You can't keep this forever." She whispered sharply, "I'm not keeping it forever. Just not now." I stood frozen. The cashier asked me if I needed bags, but I barely heard her. I just nodded, paid quickly, and walked out with my groceries in a daze. My mind spun in circles as I walked home. What was she hiding? Why did she not want my son to know something? And why did those words feel like they connected to the way she looked at me during the visit? Distant, guarded, uncomfortable. When I reached home, I set the grocery bags on the kitchen counter, but I didn't put anything away. I just stood there, gripping the edge of the counter with both hands. I wasn't angry, just worried. Worried in a way only a mother can be. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe it was something personal. Maybe it wasn't serious. But the secrecy, that troubled me. Families fall apart not because of fights, but because of silence, secrets, the things left unsaid. 2 more days passed before something unexpected happened. It was a Thursday morning. I was watering the plants in my backyard when I heard footsteps approaching from the side of the house. I turned around thinking it was the neighbor's cat again, but instead, I saw my daughter-in-law standing there. My heart jumped a little. She had never visited alone before. She looked pale, almost as if she hadn't slept. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes darted around before settling on me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I said softly, "Are you all right?" She hesitated before answering. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded and guided her inside. She stepped into the living room and sat at the edge of the couch, her back straight, her fingers twisting together nervously. I sat across from her, giving her space, giving her time. She took a deep breath, then another, and then she looked up at me with eyes that seemed to carry more weight than she could bear. She said, "I need to tell you something." My chest tightened. I didn't know what she was about to say, but I knew it mattered. I knew it was the thing that had been creating the distance between us. I knew this moment was the beginning of the truth I had been sensing in the shadows.
But before she could speak again, her eyes filled with tears. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she whispered. I leaned forward slightly. "It's okay," I said softly. "Just tell me." She closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength. When she opened them again, she looked directly at me, vulnerable, fragile, scared. And then she said the words that would change everything. "I didn't marry your son because I wanted to. I married him because I had no choice." I remember asking myself if maybe I had failed somewhere quietly without noticing. Maybe I had not shown enough love. Maybe I had not been warm enough. Maybe I had scared her. Or maybe she simply believed that marriage was something sacred that belonged only to the two of them without family involvement. But then another thought slipped in, soft but firm. No, she didn't hide the wedding to protect it. She hid it because she didn't want me in the picture. It was strange how pain could sit so still inside the chest. It didn't scream. It didn't move. It didn't burn. It just sat there, like a quiet stone pressing down on my heart. After she closed the door that night, I didn't go home immediately. I sat in my car for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, staring at the empty street. I kept thinking of my son, the way he used to run to me after school, the way he hugged me on his college graduation day. I kept wondering where that boy went, how he grew into a man who could allow something like this to happen. My phone stayed silent. No text, no call, no, "Mom, let's talk." Just silence. When I finally drove home, I felt like the world had become smaller somehow. My house looked the same, but it felt unfamiliar. I went inside, set my bag down on the table, and sat in the living room without turning on the lights. The quiet filled every corner of the house like a heavy blanket. I should sleep, I told myself, but my mind refused to rest. The next morning, I woke up to a message from my sister. "How did the dinner go? Did she show you the dress?" I stared at the words for a long time before replying. There was no wedding to plan. They already married. She called me within seconds. "What? When? Why? Why didn't they tell us?" Her voice sounded offended, almost angry, like it was her own daughter who had hidden it. I listened to her talk for a long time, but I felt strangely distant, like the whole conversation was happening underwater. I finally told her I didn't want to discuss it anymore. After the call, I sat on my bed for a long while thinking about everything. I didn't want to be the mother who begged for love. I didn't want to be the woman who forced herself into places where she was clearly not welcome. But I also didn't want to lose my son. Throughout the week, I tried to distract myself. I cleaned the kitchen, even though it was already clean. I rearranged the living room furniture. I watered the plants twice a day. Anything to keep my mind busy. But every time I paused, even for a moment, the silence crept back in. A few days later, my phone buzzed. It was my son. "Mom, can we talk?" 3 words. Simple, but they felt like they carried the weight of an apology behind them. I replied, "Yes." He came in the evening. When I opened the door, I noticed he looked tired. Not physically tired, but emotionally worn out, like he had been carrying something heavy inside him. He took off his shoes and walked in slowly, almost hesitant. I waited for him to speak. He sat down on the couch, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and ran his fingers through his hair, a gesture he used to do as a teenager when he was stressed. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know you're hurt." I didn't respond. I let him speak. He waited. "I didn't mean for you to find out like that. We were going to tell you. I just didn't know how to say it. Why didn't you tell me before it happened?" My voice didn't break. It didn't shake. It was steady, soft, and honest. He looked down. "She didn't want a big wedding, and she didn't want family there. Not yours, not hers. She said weddings become complicated when families get involved." I listened, trying to understand, but it still hurt. "So you agreed?" I asked quietly. He swallowed before answering, "Yes." There was a long pause. I could hear the ticking of the clock behind him. "I didn't think it would matter this much," he added. I closed my eyes for a second. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Not because he said it, but because he believed it. "It mattered to me," I said softly. "I wanted to be there for you, not for a celebration, not for a party, just for you." He nodded, guilt in his eyes. "I know. And I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. I should have tried harder. I should have talked to you." The apology was real. I could hear it in his voice. But the wound was already open. "I just wanted to be part of that moment," I whispered. "I know. I should have fought harder. I should have made her understand." I looked at him carefully. "Is that what happened? She didn't want me there?" He hesitated just long enough for me to understand the truth. "She said she wanted the day to be simple. She said she gets anxious when too many people are involved. She said she needed it to feel like ours." I nodded slowly. "And I'm not yours?" I asked, not accusing, just trying to understand. He reached for my hand, gently. "You are. You'll always be. But marriage is complicated." "I know," I said softly. "But family is supposed to help with that, not make it harder." "I know," he said again. We sat in silence for a while. I looked at him, really looked at him. My son, my gentle-hearted boy who grew up eating dinner at this same table. The boy who used to hug me every morning before school. The boy who stayed up late studying with me, sitting beside him. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man now. A husband. Someone trying to balance love, loyalty, and the new responsibilities that came with marriage. But even then, it hurt that I didn't fit into the picture he was trying to build. "I want you to meet her again," he said finally. "Maybe things will get better." I shook my head gently. "She didn't hide your wedding because she was shy. She hid it
because she didn't want me there. That's harder to forget. "Mom," he whispered. "I'm not angry," I told him. "Just sad." He looked at me with a vulnerability I hadn't seen since he was a child. He said, "I don't want to lose you." I answered, "You won't, but I need time to breathe." He nodded, accepting it. When he left, the door closed with a soft click. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. I stood in the hallway for a long moment thinking about everything he said and everything he didn't say. Later that night, as I lay in bed, memories kept coming to me. Memories of his childhood, of holding his hand while crossing the street, of teaching him to tie his shoes, of listening to him talk about his dreams. I remembered the way he used to tell me every detail of his day. I remembered the way he laughed when he told me he had met someone special, the woman who was now his wife. And I wondered, when did we stop talking like that? When did he stop sharing his life with me? When did I become someone he had to explain things to instead of someone he wanted to confide in? The next morning, I sat outside on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the quiet street. The air was cool, and the sky was a soft shade of gray. It felt like the world was slowing down just long enough for me to think. I wasn't angry at her, and I wasn't angry at him. I was simply grieving, something I didn't even know I had lost until it slipped away. The days passed slowly after that. I didn't hear from my daughter-in-law. Not a message, not a call, not even a simple, "I'm sorry if things felt awkward." I didn't expect anything, but the silence felt like an answer on its own. My son checked on me often. He sent short messages every day. "Did you eat? How are you feeling? Need anything?" He was trying. He was reaching out. And I loved him for that. But things were different now. Maybe temporarily, maybe permanently. I didn't know yet. A week later, he asked if he could stop by again. This time, he looked more steady, like he had thought things through. "Mom," he said, "she wants to come with me." I nodded slowly. "Okay." "She wants to explain," he added. I stayed quiet, thinking. "Explain what?" I asked softly. "The secret wedding? The closed door? Or the way she looked at me that night?" "She feels bad," he said. "She said she panicked the other day." Panicked. That word sat oddly in my mind. I exhaled slowly. "Bring her." He looked relieved. When they came the next day, she stood at the door with her hands clasped together. She didn't look arrogant this time. She looked nervous. I stepped aside to let them in. She sat on the couch, and I sat across from her. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then she finally opened her mouth and said, "I'm sorry." The words were simple, but the tone behind them felt real. I shouldn't have said it like that. I didn't mean to hurt you. I nodded gently, waiting for the rest. "I should have told you," she added. "I should have trusted you more." Trusted me? That choice of words surprised me. "What made you think you couldn't?" I asked quietly. She took a deep breath. "My family is complicated, very complicated. I didn't want the same problems to spill into this marriage. I wanted a small moment of peace." I listened carefully, not interrupting. She continued, "I didn't hide it from you out of disrespect," she said softly. "I hid it because I didn't know how to let people in." Her voice trembled slightly, not dramatically, just enough to show she meant it. My son looked at her with gentle concern, as if hearing parts of this for the first time himself. I took a breath and let her words settle in my heart. They didn't erase the hurt, but they softened it a little. "I understand," I said gently, "but you need to understand something too." She lifted her eyes to me. "When you marry someone," I said, You marry their world too. Their family, their memories, their people. You don't have to love us all the same, but you can't shut us out entirely. She nodded, swallowing hard. I know, she said, whispered. And I'm not perfect. I make mistakes too, but I'm not here to make your life harder. I just want to be part of my son's life. I know, she said again, her voice soft. The room grew quiet, not tense, just thoughtful. My son reached for her hand, and for the first time, I saw a team. Not two people hiding secrets, not two people building a wall, but two young adults trying to figure out how to be a family. After a long moment, she said softly, "Can we try again?" I nodded. Trying is all we can do. And for the first time since all of this began, I felt the weight inside me lighten. When they left that day, the house didn't feel as heavy as before. The air felt softer, lighter, like something inside had been quietly untangled. I stayed by the doorway for a few minutes after the door closed, just breathing in the moment, letting myself feel the shift that had begun between us. Not a perfect fix, not a pretty ending, but the start of understanding, and that was enough. For the next few days, I tried not to expect too much. When someone hurts you, even intentionally, your heart becomes cautious. You learn to move slowly, step by step, even when you forgive. But to my surprise, my daughter-in-law took the first steps. Not rushed, not dramatic, just small, sincere gestures.
One morning, she texted me a recipe she thought I would like. Another day, she sent a picture of a plant she bought, saying she remembered I loved gardening. They were simple things, quiet things, but they mattered. My son visited more often, too, sometimes alone, sometimes with her. He seemed calmer, more present. It was as if talking everything through had untied something inside him, too. He smiled more, laughed more, and didn't look as tense. One evening they invited me for dinner, just the three of us. I agreed, not because everything was magically healed, but because healing only happens when we show up. I dressed simply, nothing fancy, and took a small dessert bowl I had made earlier that day. When I arrived, she opened the door with a soft smile. Not forced, not stiff, just warm enough to feel real. "Come in," she said gently. The apartment looked different this time, not because anything had changed physically, but because the tension I had once felt was gone. It felt more open, more welcoming, more peaceful. They had cooked pastas, salad, and garlic bread. My son proudly said he made the pasta himself, and she laughed, saying she supervised every step because he used too much salt. We ate, we talked, we laughed quietly, and for the first time, I saw not a stranger sitting across from me, but a young woman trying to make room for me in her life, slowly and carefully. After dinner, she showed me their wedding photos, tiny, simple moments captured on a small digital camera. There were only a few pictures, just the two of them, a small ceremony under a tree by the river. No decorations, no guests, no noise. Just two people choosing each other. And unexpectedly, I understood. Not fully, but enough. "Would you like a copy of this one?" she asked, holding up a picture of the two of them smiling shyly at each other during their vows. "Yes," I said softly. We didn't talk about the past that night. We didn't bring up the hurt, the misunderstandings, the closed door. Some things don't need to be repeated once they've already been acknowledged. Sometimes the healing happens between the lines, in the quiet moments, not the big conversations. When I got home later, I placed the photo on my shelf, not to replace the pain, but to remind myself
that relationships are made of chapters, not single pages. And this chapter, it was beginning to look gentler than the last. Weeks passed. We found a rhythm. Simple, slow, steady. I visited occasionally, and sometimes they came to my home for tea. My daughter-in-law began opening up little by little, telling me about her job, her interests, her childhood in pieces, like tiny stones she placed carefully into my hands. Some stories made sense of her anxieties. Some made me ache for her, and some made me respect her more than I expected. One afternoon, as we sat together on her balcony, she said something I never thought I would hear. When I got married, I was scared I wasn't good enough for his family. I was scared I would disappoint you. The honesty in her voice was soft, almost fragile. I shook my head slowly. You don't have to be perfect, just kind. That's enough. She looked down at her fingers and nodded. I'm trying, she whispered. I know, and that matters. Later that evening, my son walked me to the car. The sky was dimming into a deep blue, and a gentle breeze brushed past us. Thank you, he said quietly, for giving us another chance. I smiled faintly. We're family, I told him. Family tries. He hugged me. Long, warm, familiar. It was the kind of hug I hadn't felt from him in months, maybe even years. In that moment, I realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes relationships bend, sometimes they even crack, but they don't always break, not when love still lives in the pieces. Time moved forward with a kinder rhythm. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when the past echoed a little too loudly, but they didn't last. The effort on both sides kept us moving toward each other, even if slowly. One afternoon, my daughter-in-law asked if I could help her choose fabric for their new curtains. Another day, she called to ask for advice about a family tradition she wanted to understand better. She let me in, not all at once, not loudly, but gently. And I let her in too. One evening, months later, something happened that I didn't expect. They came to my house with a small envelope. My son handed it to me, smiling a little nervously. I opened it. Inside was a simple printed card. A date, a location, a small note at the bottom. We'd like to renew our vows, this time with family. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up at them, my son and the young woman who once shut a door in my face because she didn't know how to let people in. Her eyes were warm, hopeful. She said softly, "We want you there. We want you in the pictures, in the memories, in the moment." I felt something inside me loosen. Grief, relief, gratitude, love, all tangled together. My voice trembled just a little as I asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "We want to start over, properly, with you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. All the sadness, all the loneliness, all the quiet disappointments that had lived inside me for months, maybe years, softened and began to let go. My son stepped forward and hugged me again. This time, she joined the hug too. We stood there in my living room, the three of us, wrapped in something that felt tender and healing. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't flawless, but it was real. And real was enough.
The day of their vow renewal was small and simple, just like their first wedding, but this time filled with warmth and family. I helped her pick her dress. I helped arrange the flowers. I stood with them during the ceremony. I took pictures. I laughed. I cried quietly when no one was looking. And when they said their vows again, this time looking at both each other and their families, I knew, truly knew, that we had not lost one another. We had simply stumbled and then chosen to get back up together. Later that night, as I sat at home, looking at the photos on my phone, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. Real peace. I thought about the day she told me, "We got married yesterday." I thought about how broken I felt in that moment. I thought about how far we had come since then. And I realized something quietly profound. Life doesn't always give you perfect beginnings. Sometimes it hands you messy ones, uncomfortable ones, unexpected ones. But beginnings are just that, beginnings. The real story is what you choose to build afterward. As I closed my eyes that night, I whispered a small promise to myself. I will not hold on to the hurt more than I hold on to the love. And from that day forward, I didn't. Because family isn't about perfect moments or pretty stories. It's about trying again, about showing up, about choosing love even when it feels easier to walk away. And sometimes it's about standing at a doorway that once closed on you and watching it finally open.